begin, could you please state your name, date of birth, and place of birth?
Yeah, okay. My name's Alf Dubbs. My title is Lord Dubbs. I was born in Prague in December 1932.
Now, you were 6 years old when you were evacuated from Czechoslovakia. How much do you remember from the period before this? For example, your family life. What did your average day look like?
Well, I remember quite a lot, and I'll tell you why I do. Because if one has a big change in one's life at an early age, one starts thinking back upon it. So when I was 7, I started thinking of what happened to me when I was 5 or 6. And that fixed it in my memory in a way in which it would not have done had I had no change in my life from year 1 to year 18. So I can remember quite a lot, which surprises people. My normal life, well, I just started at school before I came on the Kindertransport. I remember things like, I don't know, Christmas, what do I remember? I remember my father having a fall on the ice and damaging his arm. I remember going to school. I remember when the Germans occupied Prague, we had to tear the picture of President Beneš out of the school book and stick in a picture of Hitler. I remember my father was Jewish, my mother wasn't, so my father left Prague the day that the Germans invaded, which I think was March or April 1939. He just disappeared. His cousins, with whom he discussed it, apparently said they're staying. He said he's getting out, and they ended up in Auschwitz. So it was. I never discovered why he knew what he knew or why he did what he did, because most of the Jews of Central Europe just waited for things to happen, and that was and they died. They ended up in the camps. Anyway, so he disappeared. My mother said he's gone away, and I was always told never to discuss at school anything that mentioned at school anything that was talked about at home. Well, anyway, things like that. I remember we went on holiday to Austria one summer. Or no, Hungary went on holiday, yes, and things like that. So yeah, I have memories, but you don't want any more of them.
Do you remember the events that led up to the evacuation? For example, when you first heard from your parents or your mother that you were going to be able to escape?
Well, I was 6 years old, and I didn't quite know what was happening. I knew there was tension. I knew my father had disappeared suddenly. There were German soldiers everywhere in Prague, but I wasn't sufficiently knowledgeable or sophisticated to know really what it all meant. Except I knew it meant something because there were tensions. My mother was very, very worried about everything, I could tell. And then she said, I'm going to go and join my father, because I kept asking her what had happened to him. But don't forget, I was very lucky, because most of the Kindertransport children, they said goodbye to their parents in Prague and never saw them again. So I was very lucky. So anyway, so then she said, well, I'll put you on the train. So she put me on the train. I can still see in front of me Prague station, and my mother standing there looking very anxious. It was about midnight. A German soldier with a swastika standing there. I got on the train, train went off.
What happened when you arrived in London?
Well, we had to go through. Well, first of all, we got to the Dutch border, and the older ones. I was about the youngest on this train. The older ones, they cheered because they knew it was significant to have got out of Germany, because the train went across Germany. I didn't fully understand, and then we got to by boat, and then to Harwich, and then we got to Liverpool Street. Well, Liverpool Street station, where there's now a memorial to the Kindertransport. We had numbers, we had little labels and things, and most of them were being taken by foster parents. I was lucky; I had a father who took me, so I went off with him eventually. Well, we had to sit there and wait. It took ages while they went through the names and lists and made sure everybody had somewhere to go. And then went to my father, and then he was anxious about whether my mother would get out. And he put me in a little school to learn English. So I could learn English. Mind you, at 6 you learn English quickly. It's called survival.
Do you still speak Czech though?
A já jsem zkoušel všechno zapomněl, já nevím česky. Look, I was in Prague and I asked something, and the person I asked in the street thought I was Czech, but I couldn't understand a word of what he said.
Well, that's good then.
Give me a month, 2 months in Bratislava, and I promise you I'll learn a bit, but I've forgotten it. Well, I should know more, because during the war I was at a school run by the Czechoslovak government for refugee children. So there were about 300 or 400 of us in this school. So we did speak Czech then.
What was your most memorable experience from the transport train?
So what?
What was your most memorable experience from the transport train?
Gosh. I mean, the parting from my mother was very traumatic because of the tensions. We got to the Czech-German border and the documents weren't right, so they had to send somebody by car to get the documents. We went across Germany. A German soldier came in once, and actually was quite friendly, which surprised us. And then we got to Holland. I looked out for windmills and wooden shoes and saw no windmills. It was dark. I saw no windmills and wooden shoes. Well, you know, that's all I knew about Holland. And we got on the boat, and I was in a cabin, and there was an older boy who was supposed to look after me. And it was full of sort of odd memories, but nothing very coherent. But as I was saying, my mother gave me a little knapsack of food. I didn't eat anything for 2 days. So I must have been a bit traumatized.
Yeah.
You know, it must have been traumatized. I mean, I can't remember feeling traumatized, but clearly if one, you know, if you don't eat anything for 2 days, it's kind of odd. So that was, I suppose, and then seeing my father at Liverpool Street Station and all that. So it was a lot of memories rather than just one memory. Am I talking too fast? You want me to slow down? Okay.
So, what did you do after you finished school? You went to the Czechoslovak gymnasium?
Well, that was in. Well, no. What happened was my father had been offered a job. It was actually in Northern Ireland by somebody who'd left Central Europe long before, and so we went to Northern Ireland. It's quite funny because my father had written to my mother and said, if you manage to get out of Prague, we're going to Cookstown. My mother looked up an atlas and said, confusing Cookstown in Northern Ireland with Cooktown in Australia, and said, oh, we're going to Australia. Anyway, so we went to Northern Ireland, and we went immediately to Northern Ireland, and then a few months later my father had a heart attack and died. So my mother, then we came back to England from Northern Ireland. I mean, it was all British, Northern Ireland, of course. And she arranged for me to go to the Czechoslovak school, which was actually in Wales. Okay, so I went there for 2.5 years.
So you were classmates with Mrs. Gissing, Lady Baines?
Yeah, they were all ahead of me. I was junior. Yes, that's where we all met. That's where I met Vera. That's where I met Milner. Yes, oh yes. There's a whole lot of us. We occasionally have reunions. Yes. So I was a little boy. You see, when you're at the school, you look up to the older ones, but they don't remember you. Because you're not important. The younger ones are not so important. That's how schools work, isn't it?
Yeah.
No, so we were there at the school together, yes. You finished? Yes.
Well, okay, so go ahead.
No.
You were 6 years old when you left.
Yes.
So at that time, you already said that you couldn't possibly grasp what danger you were running from completely.
I
You
didn't
couldn't understand everything.
I didn't understand the significance of my father going away, the tension, the fact that one day German soldiers were everywhere. There was more tension in '38, even before that, when the Sudetenland business happened. You know, there was a lot of tension then. But I remember for some reason somebody dropped tear gas in Prague, because we went into Prague, you know, tear gas. You understand what tear gas is? Anyway, I don't know whether that was a Czech preparation or what it was, but anyway, that happened. But however, so really, I didn't understand what was happening, and it took me a little bit of time when I was till I got up to England before I began to learn everything that had happened. I just knew Hitler was there, the Czech president's picture, I had to go for my school book and so on. Big difference. But what it meant, I didn't know at the time. Not till I got older.
When and on what occasion did you return to Czechoslovakia for the very first time?
Yeah, my mother was always a bit worried about me coming back because she thought the communists would call me up in the army or something. You know, but my mother died in 1959, and I just got married, and so my wife and I we came by car, and we went to Prague, and then we came through Bratislava on our way to Vienna, and that was in 1960, and it was a different. I can tell you what a different world it was. We arrived in Prague. I hadn't booked a hotel. The tourist office had lots of Czechs or Czechoslovaks waiting for a hotel room, but for foreigners there was a privileged access. We immediately got a hotel room because in a country that was supposed to be equal, there was more inequality than there was in the capitalist world. I was embarrassed. There were special. You probably know this. There were special shops where with foreign currency you could buy things that no other person in Prague could buy. I thought it was appalling. And they put us in a hotel which was for Russians, mainly Russians. The Czechs who were working in the hotel, they were very friendly, and when they discovered we were British, they were even friendlier. But anyway, well, because it was, but it was a world of tremendous inequality. You know, there were two. If a restaurant was full, and I asked in English for a table, they always found a table. It was terrible. It's terrible how they treated foreigners and certain leading communists in a privileged way, and everybody else was second class. I was quite interested in politics at that point. I thought, I believe in equality, not this sort of stuff.
What did you do after finishing school?
Well, see, I got very interested in politics. I should explain that. What happened was that when I was about 12 or 13, or even perhaps younger, I began wondering why what had happened to me and the world. And I know it sounds a bit pompous. I'm trying not to be too pompous, if you know what pompous means. But I thought to myself, well, if evil politicians can do so many terrible things, maybe politics could also be a way of changing that. In other words, if the politics has the power to make things worse for people, it could also have the power to make things better for people. So I got passionately interested in politics. So after I left school, I went to the London School of Economics, because that was the most political university in Britain, and I studied economics and politics. And anyway, one thing led to another. I joined the Labour Party. I became a local councillor, for local council. And then I stood for Parliament. And the first time I didn't, but then I got elected to Parliament. And then I lost in one election. And then I was head of the Refugee Council. It was quite hard, somebody who was a refugee actually to become head of the Refugee Council. Although the refugees at that point, this is later of course, were mainly from other countries, were not European. And then I was put in the House of Lords, where I still am.
And is there anything else in your life that was strongly influenced by your childhood experiences?
Oh, I think lots of things were. My belief, I mean, having seen what anti-Semitism meant, I got very involved in matters to do with equality, not discriminating against people, both on race, on colour, on gender. I was involved in things like that even before I was elected as a councillor. And one of the things that influenced me most in politics was, in fact, my belief in tackling discrimination and tackling racism. So when I was in the House of Commons, Labour Party was in opposition, and I was on the front bench. You know what front bench means? I was the shadow the opposition spokesperson on immigration and race relations, for example. And one other funny thing happened. I was in the House of Commons. Before then, we were in a committee dealing with the change in British nationality law. Right, it became the British Nationality Act of 1982-83, and I was on the committee dealing with British nationality. Which I thought was quite funny actually, because I thought here my naturalised British subject, helping to make the law of British citizenship. So I thought that was quite amusing. There was also a time when one election I stood in the centre of London. I didn't win, and I was a sort of part Jewish refugee from Prague, and my opponent was a man called Christopher Tugendhat, who stood for the Conservatives, who was a Jewish refugee from Vienna. And the newspapers didn't pick up that the battle for the centre of Britain, for the constituency in the middle of London, where the whole Westminster, was being contested by two people from Central Europe. And the journalists weren't very good at that. They didn't pick it up.
And how do you feel when you met the man who saved your life for the first time?
Well, I was very emotional because when I didn't know for years about Nicholas Winton. I knew I'd come on a kinder transport, and then only about 15 or 20 years ago did the news get out, and then I met him several times. Well, obviously, first of all, he's a great guy. He's incredibly witty. He's delightful to talk to. For his 92nd or 93rd birthday, they gave him a present of a flight on a microlight aircraft. You know a microlight aircraft. Yeah. Well, I wouldn't dare go. Anyway, but he's very amusing, very funny, quite caustic. He's got a very sharp sense of humour, and he a terrific guy, and very modest. His wife apparently didn't know for years what he'd done. Nobody knew. He kept it quiet, and he just did it, and saved a lot of people's lives. So we all feel we're the Winton children, and we have enormous affection for him because I would have thought none of us would have survived had it not been for him, that he got us out. So, one feels pretty good and pretty warm towards somebody who saved one's life. Doesn't one?
Anything else?
We have one last question.
Sure.
If you could one piece of advice for future generations, something that you've learned from your experience, what would it be?
Well, coming directly from my experience, let me think about that. I suppose that one must oppose anything that has a touch of fascism, that one must oppose people who want to discriminate against other human beings, who say that some people are inferior and some people are better, and there's plenty of that in the world. It's happened. It didn't stop in 1945. It goes on now, and I think one must say one has to be absolutely resolute in opposing that, and saying we're all equal as human beings, whether we're women, men, black, white, whatever.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Brilliant.
Okay.
Thank you. Wonderful.
Okay.
It's going to be time to meet the Queen again soon for you. So
Okay. And listen, thank you for your questions, by the way. I think you're terrific. I think the emails we've exchanged and so on, and the questions you've asked, thank you very much. Thank you very much for being so interested.